Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today. I hope you are ready to learn. We will explore housing delivery systems. Let's begin.
Let's dive right into this explainer, shall we? Today we're uncovering the massive, kind of hidden ecosystem that literally builds the world around us right here in Malaysia. I mean, we walk past construction sites every single day, right? We live in houses, we rent apartments. But the sheer complexity of how these structures actually come to exist, it's something most of us rarely stop to think about. So we're going to unpack the stakeholders in Malaysian housing provision. We'll look at exactly what the different government levels do, the developers, the financial institutions, and really the entire housing delivery process from start to finish.
But before we get completely bogged down in the bureaucracy and all those intricate steps, we gotta ask ourselves a pretty basic question. Who is actually responsible for putting a roof over our heads? Is it the guy out there laying the bricks? Is it the bank funding the massive loan? Or is it some government official signing off on a piece of paper? Well, the truth is, it's a highly coordinated web of literally all of them.
To answer that, we're going to follow this blueprint to brick journey. We'll quickly run through the overall housing ecosystem, the 3 tiers of government, the private sector players, how we finance the dream, and wrap it up with the delivery system itself.
All right, starting with number 1, the housing ecosystem, public versus private. Let's explore the basic framework of how housing, which, let's face it, is a fundamental human need and a huge chunk of the urban economy, is actually categorized in Malaysia.
Now just look at the striking gap here between the final product, that sprawling urban economy stretching all the way to the horizon, and the boardroom stakeholders who are actually making the big decisions. Every single tower you see in that city skyline, it started as a conversation between public and private stakeholders sitting in a room just like the one you see here. And within this ecosystem, we're really looking at 2 very different approaches. On one hand, you've got public housing developers. These guys are subject to the highest levels of government interference, mostly because they're tasked with fulfilling specific public welfare mandates. But on the other side, we have the private developers. They're generally left to pursue their own business objectives. And here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. It's actually the private sector that provides the vast bulk of the market's housing demand in Malaysia.
Okay, moving on to part 2, the 3 tiers of government, or as I like to call them, the rule makers, because without them, literally not a single plot of land gets cleared. This constitutional hierarchy brilliantly illustrates what's called the concurrent list in the federal constitution. You see, housing isn't just managed by one giant monolithic entity. Instead, the responsibilities cascade down a sort of pyramid. It flows from the federal level at the very top, down to the state, and finally hits the local authorities. Let's actually break down what each of these levels does. Up at the very top, the federal level acts as the overarching architect. Now, they don't pour the concrete themselves, obviously. Instead, they formulate the national housing policies, handle the funding, and set the overarching guidelines. They're the ones licensing developers and issuing sales permits. Plus, they prepare the budget under the National Development Plan and set those really important targets for low-cost housing. All of this falls under the Ministry of Urban Well-being, Housing and Local Government, whose main gig is to create a quality, sustainable living environment for everyone.
So to keep this massive machine running, the National Housing Department, which sits under that ministry, uses specific divisions. I've highlighted a few of the crucial ones here. They've got a licensing division to make sure only qualified developers even enter the market. There's a private housing monitoring division that keeps a close eye on licensed projects right up until completion. And, incredibly importantly, they have an abandoned project rehabilitation division. These are the folks who step in to protect buyers' interests when things go horribly wrong.
But as we move down the pyramid to the second tier, things shift dramatically. You really need to remember this. The state government holds the ultimate trump card. Why? Because in Malaysia, land is a state matter. This means the state has absolute power and control over all land approvals, conversion, and subdivision for any housing development. The federal government can write all the policies they want, but the state actually has to allocate the land. Oh, and they also dictate the quotas for low and low-medium cost developments. Finally, right at the base of our government pyramid, we have the local authorities. These are your boots-on-the-ground bureaucrats, your municipal and city councils. They are the ones actually approving the development orders and building plans. They actively monitor the projects right in their own jurisdiction, implement the state's policies, and ultimately, they're the ones who hand out the final and definitely the most important piece of paperwork.
And that final paperwork is the CCC, or the Certificate of Compliance for Completion.
This is an absolutely essential acronym to keep in mind. Honestly, without the CCC, a building is just a giant, empty, useless shell. But once the local authority issues this specific certificate, it means your home is officially compliant with all the rules and is legally 100% ready to be lived in.
All right, so the federal government set the rules, the state approved the land, and the local authorities reviewing the plans. Let's jump into Section 3, the private sector players, the orchestrators who actually execute this massive vision.
First up, we have the developer. It helps to think of the developer kind of like the conductor of a giant orchestra. They oversee the entire housing production process. They're the primary business coordinators, meaning they're the ones harnessing the financial resources, making sure all the necessary legal submissions are handled, and ensuring the project is high quality, successfully marketed, and actually sold. But of course, they definitely don't do it alone.
It's actually a sequential chain of professionals passing the baton from one expert to the next. First, your town planner prepares the overall layout plan for the project and liaises with the local authorities. Then the architect steps in. They hold the huge responsibility of coordinating all the professional inputs and literally submitting the building plans. And finally, the engineers take over the deeply technical stuff. We're talking ensuring structural integrity, planning out the sewerage, and designing the ventilation systems. Once all those highly detailed plans get the green light, the main and subcontractors are brought in. They're usually appointed via a tender process, and it becomes the builder's absolute responsibility to make sure they have adequate manpower and the right materials to turn those approved blueprints into actual, physical bricks and mortar.
Which brings us to Section 4, financing the dream. Because, let's be real, none of those blueprints get drawn and absolutely zero bricks get laid without the money from financial institutions.
This is a perfect contrast of the two sides of the real estate financial coin. Commercial banks and credit institutions basically provide two main types of financing. On one side, we have bridging finance. This is a massive injection of capital given directly to the developer to boost their initial or intermediate funds, just so they can actually afford to construct the project. On the flip side is end financing. That's the mortgage. It's the loan given to you, the purchaser, to assist you in actually buying and owning that completed housing unit. And the kicker? Both of these are entirely reliant on each other to keep the whole market moving.
All right, the final piece of the puzzle, Section 5, the delivery system. All of these elements, the government rulemakers setting the boundaries, the private orchestrators designing and building, and the banks fueling the whole thing with cash, they all culminate right here.
The entire ecosystem we've just mapped out exists purely to feed this housing delivery system. At its core, this is a systemic process designed to ensure that different types of affordable housing are successfully provided to the people, and this delivery system actually unfolds across 6 crucial steps. First, you have initial land identification. Second, the feasibility studies. Third, securing all those planning approvals. Fourth is the actual construction phase. Fifth, the handing over of vacant possession to the buyers. And finally, step 6, ongoing property management.
Now, I should mention, this delivery system isn't exactly a flawless machine. It's incredibly sensitive and gets heavily impacted by a few shifting factors. Things like the cost and supply of building materials can literally halt a project overnight. The availability of land, which, remember, is controlled by the states, dictates where we can even build. Then you have the allocation of housing, the sheer efficiency of the construction process itself, and of course, professional ethics, basically ensuring that corners aren't cut and buyers aren't getting cheated.
Every time a project stalls, or on the flip side, every time a vibrant new neighborhood successfully opens its doors, it almost always comes down to how well the ecosystem navigated these specific shifting variables. I mean, the beautiful completed apartments you see in this backdrop, they're the direct result of all these factors aligning perfectly across both the public and private sectors.
So here's what I want you to take away from this. The next time you walk through a neighborhood or just look out your window at the city skyline, really look at the buildings and ask yourself, how did this massive, complex web of unseen stakeholders, from the federal policymakers all the way down to the local council approving the CCC, from the town planners to the bridging financiers, how did they all work together to shape the very roof over your head? It really is a remarkable blueprint to brick journey. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep questioning the built world around you.